uh, and also within the Research and Innovation Office on a number of international projects. So it's good to be here. I'll be talking this morning about a project, a very recent project in Sub-Saharan Africa.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. And let's go to Richard Hasenberg in Northampton.
Thanks, Mark, and good morning, everybody. My name is Richard Hasenberg. I lead the Institute for Social Innovation and Impact at the University of Northampton. My background is very much around social innovation and social enterprise, and Northampton's quite a unique university, as I'll talk about later, very similar to GCU in that we're in a Ashoka Changemaker U campus, which means that we have a central commitment to social innovation. But I'll talk about that more later. And in answer to your question, Mark, it's very cold down here as well, very cold.
Pleased to hear it, thank you. Okay, apologies, Dr. Galapatati, for my pronunciation, but if you can introduce yourself and maybe teach me how to say your name properly.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Udayanga Galapati, representing University of Ruhuna, Faculty of Engineering, which is we already linked it with the GCU as a partner for Sri Lanka project. So it's about the developing renewable energy technology hub. So I'm going to discuss about that experience as well as few European projects as well. So yeah, all those gave us real good links with the international collaborators. So I will present and I will discuss those things, those experiences.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr.
Yeah,
I'm gonna learn it in the end. And over to Imad Farag, who I think is talking about a similar project also with Sri Lanka. So over to you, Imad.
Thank you, Mark. My name is Imad Farag. I'm a professor in electrical power engineering at Glasgow Caledonian University School of Computing, Engineering and Built Environment. I lead with Uday here the project for called Sri Lanka for the renewable energy hub. We'll speak about this later on. I lead other two projects in India as well, which is one of them called the e-scooter. For a 3D printing of a scooter, that is supported by the BV system or charged from a BV system. And also another project with another university in India regarding the development of a global semester for the benefit of all of students here and there. And happy to be with you today. Thank you, Mark.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think finally I see David Mcguire is here. David, I think you're the one person I haven't been in touch with this year, so Happy New Year. And if you'd like to introduce yourself, David.
Hi, my name is David Mcguire. I'm a reader in human resource development at Glasgow Caledonian University. Happy New Year to everyone. In terms of international experience, I've worked and taught in a number of countries, including the United States, Russia, which was interesting, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, obviously, and Malaysia and Singapore. So I'm happy to share those experiences with you and delighted to be with you today.
Fantastic. Thanks, David. I think we have some really interesting profiles here, really interesting experiences, not just with Sri Lanka, but across the world. I'm actually going to turn to Imad first, just to give us a bit of background to your project, Imad, and how the project began and maybe a few reflections on how you think international engagement works from your perspective.
Thank you, Mark, to put me in the spot to be the first speaker. Right. No, that's fine. The project I'm going to focus on first, of course, the one related to Sri Lanka, which is the Sri Lanka. And the word the three, as a letter 3 actually, is coming from that we are developing 3 tracks. So this project is mainly about establishment of a training hub, vocational training hub for technicians, engineers, and project managers in Sri Lanka, but all of these working in the area of renewable energy. So we had this idea, and we developed this idea with other countries, to be honest, in the past, but did not go through the Erasmus Plus. So in that year, 2019, 2020, we looked at where is the best to fit in the project. And when I looked at the map and the Erasmus Plus funds, so I found that Sri Lanka is as a good potential area for it. So I've started to ask colleagues around in the school and in the university, and Mark, you've been one of them. I've asked, what is the contacts with do you have in Sri Lanka? And one of my colleagues, Professor Angela Di Silva, said, okay, we had a colleague working there now. He used to be with us at GCU. And she introduced me to Odeyanga, or Odey, as he likes to call himself. I'm not going to go in the process to try and pronounce his surname. It's difficult for me as well. So I contacted Odey and said, okay, I have a written project, and this is about the establishment of the 3 tracks, 1 track for technicians, 1 track for engineers, 1 track for project managers working in the renewable energy. And this would be in a sort of developing those tracks modules or CBD kind of study to transfer or to convert into the renewable energy and make sure this is best used in Sri Lanka. He encouraged me, okay, this is a good idea, let us work together. And then I gave him the lead to lead the project, and okay, try to recruit some other universities in Sri Lanka as well. And we recruited a couple of other, actually 3 universities from Europe, Northumbria from UK, Polytechnic, it's called Torino, Polytechnic, and also another university from Romania, it's called Valea. So we worked together to shape.
Sorry,
to shape. Yeah, you can mute. So we worked together to shape the project in the context of Sri Lanka, and they did a very good job in the introduction part of the project proposal. Shows that the case is really need to be supported, and we won the project. We decided not to start in November, as used to be the Erasmus Plus project. We asked it to start on January to give us more time for preparation, even before the kickstart. So we had this, and we met few times before the official kickstart of the project, and introduced all the partners and decided what the project will be about. So we have a different experience in the project from Italy, from Romania, from the Scotland and England, if you say this is the UK, and another 6 colleagues from Sri Lanka. And those include universities, include the Sri Lankan Energy Association, and also the Sri Lanka SLIMA. What was the, if you remind me, Odey?
SLIMA means Sri Lanka Energy Managers Association, and SCA is Sri Lanka Sustainable Energy Authority.
Yeah, and yeah, so these are actually the kind of the key rules in Sri Lanka and the renewable energy. So we have a very good combination of partners from Europe and from Sri Lanka. And the good thing is it is actually scattered in Sri Lanka. And when I looked at the map in Sri Lanka, you may be easily focused on the south or the southwest part of Sri Lanka when the capital is. But we decided, okay, we need to make sure that the centers are scattered in Sri Lanka, covering all the areas. So we are designing 5 training hubs from all over Sri Lanka. You can have the northeast, you can have the southeast, you have the southwest, and you have the middle. So we cover all the areas in Sri Lanka. So all the expertise are covered. We found this is very, very useful because every university in a region, they have a certain expertise. So they're all adding up together in the project. We now almost 1 year into the project, we started with the gap analysis to understand what is there on the ground and what is needed. And this has been supported by a lot of work. They can speak about this. It's really a massive work has been done in the gap analysis to make sure the development is actually reflecting what is actually needed in Sri Lanka. And now we are in the process of developing the certificates, we call them. We are designing 20 certificates or CBD courses. So at the moment, we are developing the materials, the virtual labs, and the blended learning as well, the e-learning for all the materials. So will be a complete kind of project that is, I call it like a university rather than a project, because it includes all the possible development, teaching from the teaching point of view, which including face-to-face, labs requirements, and also the e-learning based teaching. So this is a quick overview how we started and where we are at the moment with the project. And if you have time, I can speak later on about the other projects in India as well. Hopefully this will give you a brief overview.
Great, thanks very much, Imad. I think it's really interesting, this kind of how do you approach the international partners, how do you develop the project? And you've kind of explained it from the UK end. Uday, I don't know if you can, I'm going to call you Uday because it's so much easier for me. Could you explain from your perspective how this project evolved and how you, your relationship with GCU, but also with other partners and other projects? Please go ahead.
Yeah. First, actually, I have completed my PhD doctorate from GCU. So that's how networking started. So now if we consider after completing my PhD, all the time I had linked with the GCU with several discussions and so on. So that started this discussion. Professor Mad has contacted me, and we have discussed primarily what are the requirements of Sri Lanka, what are the context of Sri Lanka, and project proposal a brief was initially developed by Professor Imad. So we discussed its applicability to Sri Lanka and how to select the partners. For example, now it is about developing skills of renewable energy related skills of engineers, project managers, as well as technical level employees. In this context, we have discussed, okay, if we are going to do that, how we select the partners. We are in one thing we have discussed, okay, if we are going to select the partners, we have to consider about the professional development. So that's why, one is related to skill development is about the professional development. So that's we have selected Sri Lanka Energy Managers Association. So that it's a professional body. At the same time, we have to think now if we targeted on national development, capacity development project, we have to think about that capacity development should directly link into the national policies. So then we have discussed Sri Lanka Sustainable Energy Authority. It's a government body which is working with the national policy development. So those we discussed. Then the next step is how we set up the centers, where we set up the centers. So as Imad explained, that we have decided to cover all the country. So 5 centers. Then the expertise, how we conduct the courses, and where we thought, okay, the best thing is we have to rely on the universities. So we have selected 5 universities across the country. So at the same time, we have discussed it is important to government as well as in Sri Lankan setup, looking at the Sri Lankan higher education setup, we thought it's okay. It should be included both government as well as the private university. So we have selected one of private university as well. So that sort of when we selecting, I mean this project actually give us good experience when we setting up things. We need to consider the criteria. Like, based on the project objectives, it is a link to the skill development. Then we have to consider the professional development, the national policies, as well as universities, and also it give everyone access. So that also we have discussed. So that sort of initiation we had, and I feel now 1 year of working experience. We are now benefited from these selections, as well as we are in good shape of conducting the project. We have all the resources, all the support, and it is for example, if you want, we have conducted the gap analysis at the first phase. When we were conducting the gap analysis, we now rather academia going on. When we are working in the academy, when we go to explore things within the industry, we have certain barriers. But since the Sri Lanka Sustainable Authority and the Sri Lanka Energy Managers Association professional body involvement, they have direct access to most of the things. They can go on search important things within the industry. So that benefited us in really identifying the gaps, and as well as then for one is university engagement. We were benefited because we know what are the undergraduate curriculums. Then there are gaps, with the industry. Now we had, this project was able to give some sort of a platform to give more links with the industry, even to the 5 universities, because we had more direct contact, direct discussion with regarding to discussing the gaps and identifying the requirement of the skill development. So I feel like it's really good initiation. And not only that, on other side is, okay, when we identify the gaps, now if you consider the last decade, European experiences with regard to renewable energy service, massive development and the good experience. So we had really good international partners, GCU, and also other 3 partners. So they had really good experience with regard to renewable energy project development, and also their testing laboratories they have set up. So that also to identify address the existing gaps, we took their feedbacks. So that allow us to matching the requirement and the gaps. So that was a really good exercise, and I feel like it's a very good exercise to all of the academics as well, because European and Sri Lankan, because we now in academy, what we try to do is actually all the time we try to improve our work with the research, find the new knowledge as well as transfer knowledge. So that I think that will give a very good platform and very good experience to everyone.
Thanks very much, Uday. I think it's very interesting because obviously the PhD helped to the beginning of your international relationships, but this whole idea of designing a project that's geographically relevant, but also relevant to government policy, etc., I think is enormously important. I've got several questions to come back to you, but let's go through the panel and hear more about their experiences. Maybe not with Sri Lanka so much, but with other countries. I think I'm going to start with Carolyn, because you've had quite a lot of experience. We're going to talk about a specific example. So I think maybe if you would like to take the floor and just take us through Unicycle and how it's worked.
Wrong project, Mark.
Yeah, size.
Size, yes. I have made a couple of slides. I promise it's not death by PowerPoint, but can I have co-hosting so I can share my screen, please?
I'm hoping there's somebody there who allow us to do it. I don't know whether I can. I don't think I can.
Looks like it's Darshana.
Can somebody make Carolyn co-host? Okay, there you go.
Fantastic. Okay. So you should be able to see some slides. Is that right? Okay. Okay, so hello, my name is Carolyn. As I said, I'm here to talk to you about the SICE project, which stands for Supporting Youth Social Entrepreneurship in Sub-Saharan Africa. And to give you a little bit of background on this project, because I think it's quite important, the SICE project is one of 24 projects funded through the Innovation for African Universities programme. And this has been funded by the British Council, but it's administered by what they call a Centre of Excellence, which is the University of Nairobi, City University London, and the Change School, who are like an ecosystem player. And basically the programme has been designed to bring universities in the UK and Sub-Saharan Africa together to engage in a platform, to interact and learn from one another. And the overall aim is to develop mutually beneficial partnerships that strengthen capacity and the capability of higher education institutions in the UK and Sub-Saharan Africa, and to look at youth employability, because across Sub-Saharan Africa, youth employability is a big problem. They've got a very large youth population and it's growing, and there's not enough employment opportunities to sustain them. So over a period of 15 months, a total of 24 partnerships, because there are 3 partners in each project, will collaborate with the aim of exchanging best practice. So on the right hand side here, this is just some of the projects. You'll see that there's always an underpinning of entrepreneurship, youth, education, but there's different focus areas. So there's a lot of incubators across Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, and Ghana. There's a focus on women, there's a focus on people with disabilities, and we all sort of engage through a program of events and workshops to share our experience and generate sort of impact through the activities. So we've just finished phase 1, which was the understanding of the problem that you identified, and we've moved into phase 2, which is an implementation of a proposal that you've come up with through the partnerships to address the problem that you we were looking at. The partners in our project, in the SICE project, are us, the Challenges Group, and also their partner, their sister organisation, Challenges Ghana, and the University of the Free State. Challenges Ghana and the Challenges Group are ecosystem players, and Free State and us are obviously universities. Through previous projects, one of which Richard was involved with, we've got well-established relationships with these organisations, which we're talking about previously, how you find your partners and work with them. With our working relationships with these organisations, we trust them to work well, and they trust us, and it's a very good equal partnership in the SICE project. So I'm just going to go through very quickly what we did in phase 1. So the aim and how we arrived at this aim, critically, this is an aim that our partnership felt that we could sufficiently address in the time period that we had to address it, based on our understanding and previous experience within Sub-Saharan Africa, and also doing similar projects elsewhere. So the aim was to understand how best to support youth social entrepreneurs in Sub-Saharan Africa. And this aim really derived from a review of a literature, grey literature and academic literature, which highlighted that Sub-Saharan youth are demonstrating social entrepreneurial intention at quite a high scale compared to other countries, yet they face considerable barriers starting and scaling enterprises and really participating. Also, the education system in Sub-Saharan Africa doesn't encourage pursuing a career in entrepreneurship. It's very much focused on getting a good job. And so by the time the youth leave school or even education, higher education, they don't perhaps have core skills needed to be successful entrepreneurs. And we focused on social entrepreneurship because of the clear gains that the social of the enterprise can offer to communities, individuals, and wider society. Between October and December, we sought to address this aim through 4 activities, and these are on the right-hand side. So the purple was understanding the barriers and the opportunities and the priorities that we would like to look at in the next phase. The green is really understanding the appetite for co-creating an educational program for within universities and outside universities as well, within communities. Community of practice was engaging with the other 23 partners, projects involved in the program. And then the pink was just a general management and dissemination. So through these activities, the SICE team developed a deeper understanding of the problem that had been identified. And this allowed us to form a more nuanced solution to support youth social entrepreneurship. We also took into account what other projects under the IEU were doing so that there wasn't replication, so that it would bring additional value to the program. So in phase 2, this is what we're just about to start. It's fine, not terrified. So we have designed and we're going to implement a program to develop and enhance the social entrepreneurial mindsets of Sub-Saharan youth. And this is going to be implemented in Ghana and South Africa. We want to create meaningful opportunities within a workplace setting, and that's working with NGOs for participants to realise or sort of apply mindsets and generate wider impact. And the project involves this implementation, and it's a very structured program. So in Ghana and South Africa, as I said, we'll recruit young people to participate in this program. In Ghana, these will be unemployed graduates. And in South Africa, there will be current students at the University of the Free State. Once they've completed this enterprise focused design thinking, and that's with 50 students, they'll then go on to work with NGOs and the communities that they serve to develop social entrepreneurial initiatives. And then during the piloting stages, what they'll do is go out into the communities, working with the NGOs and supported by seed funding that we've set aside within our budget. They will pilot these solutions and they will then go on to share these with the communities, the other groups across countries, and hopefully the wider stakeholder network. So as well as aligning with the overarching goal of the IEU, the problem and our subsequent implementation plan, it also sort of aligns with the objectives of other key players operating within the sort of social development, social and economic development sphere, NGOs. So the NGOs that we're seeking to work with have all, through the relationships with Challenges Group and the University of the Free State, indicated that their model is no longer self-sustaining. And critically, during the pandemic, they saw a reduction in funding, but an increase in need for support. And they're really looking for sort of social entrepreneurial solutions to help them implement programs, generate impact, but ensure that they're self-sustaining. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is we're seeking to inspire youth confidence, improve their employability prospects, and enhance social entrepreneurial orientation. So that will be the activities over the next 9 months. And that's all I have to say. No more PowerPoint.
Thanks very much, Carolyn. And I think it's really good to see a project that in a completely different area. And I guess the overarching kind of message there is this question of trust, that you have to have trusted partners that you can rely on and to be able to develop, especially now because we're kind of working always remotely. So you're kind of relying on good people on the ground. I'm going to ask, in a moment, I'm going to ask David, just so I give him due warning, about some of his projects, which I know are quite different in the way you've worked internationally, David. But before David speaks, I was going to ask Richard if he would like to talk a little bit about his experiences. I should explain that Richard, as he said, Richard and I, we've never actually met face to face, but we seem to be collaborating constantly on different international projects around the world, which is one day we'll actually get to meet if we really exist. I don't know. So over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, that's always amuses me that we've been working together for about 2.5 years. And still haven't met in person. And apologies, I dropped out of the session for a second with internet problems. Nothing to do with your presentation, Carolyn. I was enjoying it, but then the internet kicked me out. So I hope it stays online for me now. I guess just to start really is to think about for me what it actually means to be a social innovation or social enterprise focused university. And I think, and I said this a little bit earlier, but Northampton has a central commitment to social innovation and social enterprise, very much like GCU, with our focus on Ashoka Changemaker and other areas like that. And I think I'm going to talk a little bit shortly about some projects that we did in Southeast Asia, but when we think about universities sort of engaging in these international partnerships, I think it really does kind of it's a good thing for us to think, actually, what is a 21st century university meant to be? What is it that we're meant to be doing for our students and our communities, and really what is it we're trying to get out of projects? And I think that and Mark will know this, and Carolyn will know this from the projects that we've been on, but we kind of have this concept of this idea of a pracademic, in that really within universities, our projects absolutely should be research focused and looking at creating new knowledge. Hopefully they inform teaching and they support student journeys as well. But actually, really, they should also definitely be delivering impact in the community. And I think that is one of the core areas for me when we're looking at these kind of international partnerships and project work that we really have to consider. And Northampton itself has that sort of commitment right from the very top. Our Vice Chancellor is 100% bought into this idea of social innovation being a key focus. It runs through all of the teaching that we do, so every student at our university engages in social innovation at least in a module through the courses that they do in one way or another. And it really comes back to this idea that we see ourselves as a community anchor institution, and I don't just mean a community in terms of local to Northampton and our area of the UK, but actually, of course, of the global community. And we see now with the drive around the UN SDG frameworks and the need really for international partnerships between all different countries around the world to try and solve sustainability issues, that is a real key issue, and really has been a driver behind some of the international partnerships that we've engaged in before. The particular partnership I'm going to talk to you about today actually encompasses 3 projects and led to us really coming to work with Mark and Carolyn at GCU and obviously a number of other partners, and involved work in East and Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and South Korea. And actually, we've also, related to that, also done some work in Cambodia as well. So it's kind of quite regional, and it was very much focused on looking at what the barriers were to social innovation, research, teaching, and impact work across the universities in those countries. And we partnered up with a number of universities to deliver that. Universities in Ho Chi Minh City, Hanoi, Jakarta, Seoul, all the sort of major cities you might think across the 6-7 countries that I've listed. And really the project sought to engage with researchers and lecturers, but also senior academics at universities, vice chancellors, non-academic senior personnel at universities as well, and also policymakers and other key stakeholders in the sort of social innovation ecosystem in those 6 countries. And when we sort of looked at this, we sort of undertook quite an in-depth review, and then we carried out a survey. We managed to get several hundred responses to that survey across the countries, and then actually we went into some really in-depth interviews and focus groups in terms of trying to understand what the barriers were to this. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the research and the findings, because I think we're more interested today here about the partnerships and how it develops. But it was pretty in-depth work. We did nearly 200 interviews and focus groups to try and understand what the barriers were to social innovation research and teaching and impact work across the region. And what was really interesting that, in terms of what came out of that and relevant to today's talk, I guess, is that this idea of forming partnerships was actually, for a lot of academics and universities, much easier on the international stage than it was necessarily at the national level. And I guess if you think about that, when we're looking for partners, sometimes it's easier for us to partner with organisations that perhaps are not necessarily seen as competitors in our sphere, whether that's for geography or whether that's for the type of work that they do. And so in some ways, what we were sort of finding was that it was easier for a university, for instance, in Vietnam, to partner with a UK university or an Indonesian university than it was necessarily for them to partner with another university in Hanoi, or a partnership between a university in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. And I found that really, really interesting, because when we're looking at how we solve some of the complex problems that face society at the moment, and how we can use sort of socially innovative methods to do that, actually, yes, global partnerships are very, very important, but actually also local partnerships, not just between universities, but between other types of organisations, is really quite an interesting one. And so it was quite interesting to sort of see those barriers emerging, and look at, okay, how can we support the development of these partnerships across the countries and across the region and globally as well. And that led us on to creating the next sort of phase of the project, which we did alongside GCU, which was the Silken project, the Social Innovation Linkages for Knowledge Exchange Network. Mark, I hope I've got that right. I think I have. But the Silken network really was this idea, okay, let's bring together universities from these countries, and let's pull together a framework for action. And actually COVID, despite all of the sort of, the horrible things that it's brought, perhaps in a way was an enabler of this kind of project work, because we actually only had 4 months to deliver this. I can't remember, Mark, how many. We had a number of workshops, research workshops, teaching workshops. We had some practice and incubation work. We delivered, I think in the end, it must have been about 12 workshops and a conference across that 4-month period. So it was pretty hectic, but it was enabled by the fact that we did it all online, and we did all of this sort of online engagement in a way that we couldn't have done if we'd been having to do all of this in person, and we wouldn't have got the same level of engagement. I mean, for instance, at the conference, we had nearly 200 participants, and I don't think if we'd have held the conference physically in one of the partner countries, that would have been possible. And the idea behind this was that we were really looking at how we can develop the capacity within these universities to kickstart social innovation work within their countries. And then that developed into the next phase of the project, which doesn't start until next month, but we have a new project with GCU, and that's funded by the British Council. Again, I should say, actually, all 3 of these projects have been funded by the British Council, so we're very indebted to them for their support. But this next project now is actually, focusing in on Vietnam, and we've brought together several university partners within Vietnam, plus actually a couple of partners from Indonesia and one from Malaysia who are going to join as well, hopefully. The idea is that we're then going to engage in this kind of in-depth country partnership work. And this is all sort of filtered down from that initial kind of mapping, and then more kind of global sort of network work that we've done. And I guess, to me, perhaps to summarize before I finish, that was a really interesting thing for this, is that when we look at these, how do we identify these partnerships? How do we get partners on board? These kind of funded projects actually, I think, act as a really good catalyst, because, Mark, you talked about trust building and being able to trust the partners. You engage in these projects, you do some short-term work with them, you build relationships, you gain that trust, and it actually allows you then to take on, bigger and bigger work and more in-depth work in specific spaces. And I think that when you look at that from from a university perspective, that is something that's immensely important, as you say, to be able to have that trust in partners, and then to use that and the expertise that you have across the consortia to try and deliver impact on the ground. And that's probably where I'll finish, in that, you know, to me, the idea that universities should be delivering this impact and making tangible change on the ground in communities, in countries and in regions is absolutely at the fundamental heart of what we're talking about in terms of international HE partnership work.
Thanks very much, Rich. And I think it's interesting that probably we would never have been working together if it hadn't been for international partners. So I think there's an interesting kind of thing that actually working internationally helps you to work with partners overseas, but also helps you work with partners in your own country that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise work with. Right, this is great. I'm going to kind of bring this kind of phase of the discussion to kind of conclusion from David. I know, David, you have a kind of different perspective in, I think, many ways, and your experience in not just different geographically, but different kind of mechanisms for engaging. So I don't know if you want to take us through that.
Yeah, I think, Mark, it might be helpful if I focused on a couple of European projects that I was involved in. So I started on a European project in the hospitality sector, looking at recruitment and training of employees in hospitality sector, and that project actually was really successful and showcased at the European Commission in Brussels. And interesting side story there, my luggage got lost. Those were the days when we could do international travel, and luggage got lost on the way to Brussels, and ended up giving the presentation. And there was a national strike as well in Brussels, so I couldn't even go out and get some clothes. So I ended up in sort of jeans and a t-shirt in the European Commission building in Brussels, giving a presentation to 200 folks in the auditorium, which was fascinating. But I suppose the question you asked, Mark, is around international partnerships and finding international partnerships. And I think there's a number of important aspects to that. One is around when you're putting together, and I think this has been touched on by some of the presenters already, and I suppose I'll reinforce the point. When you're recruiting international partners, making sure that you have regional representation. So either within country or across countries. So on the European projects that I was working on, we were making sure that we had representation in countries across Europe. So we had Slovakia, we had Italy, we had Portugal, we had UK and Ireland, we had Germany, we had Denmark. So making sure there was a geographic spread, making sure that there was a spread of types of organizations. So it wasn't just heavily universities, but you also had sort of non-profit organizations in there, you had training academies in there that were bringing a different type of engagement into the project. And the other thing I would say is making sure that across the team that you have sufficient and a spread of technical expertise. So people who be coming in, so the academics who can put together the grey literature and do some of the primary research, you know, then practitioners who maybe have stronger networks and stronger contacts, other folks who may be web designers or graphic designers or people who can bring that range of expertise into the project. So I think those three factors in terms of bringing together an international partnership, certainly the projects I've been on, which is really around that regional representation, mixture of organizations, organization types and technical skills. And I thought that brought a richness to the partnership, because, you know, what we found was some of the lessons we learned was first around the importance of communication. You know, a key lesson is communicate. And what I mean by that is, you know, yes, over the past 2 years, we're by necessity having to communicate online and remotely. However, nothing beats sitting down and spending time with individuals from different countries, learning about their cultures, going to those countries, getting an understanding from people in those countries of regional priorities, the way business is done in those countries, the way that priorities are set in those countries, and the way the sort of administrative systems work in those countries. So, for example, when we were running training courses, certification wasn't the be all and end all in the UK and Ireland for some CPD courses. However, in the likes of Slovakia and Italy, that was a huge priority. So we had to make sure that, you know, if we were running CPD courses, that there were certificates available at the end, that they did have the appropriate sort of stamps and logos and branding on them, that participants could go back to their individual organizations and show that they had attended this training and that this training was above board. So I think understanding the individual priorities of partners and sort of their local requirements and administrative requirements is key in an international collaboration, and that really involves a lot of communication, you know, both formal and informal communication. I think was critical. I suppose piloting then, and you know, Carolyn talked about her project and moving into pilot across various countries that meets the requirements of each of those individual countries, and how you reach.
Okay, I'm afraid we've kind of begun to lose you there.
Constituencies within. Oh, sorry, Mark, can you hear?
Yeah, we were losing you there a little bit, David. I don't know if other people are hearing, whether it's my connection, but I think it might be yours, David. I don't know.
It's David's, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Now we can. Yep. Perfect. Okay.
Sorry, what I was saying is, in terms of piloting, the importance of making sure that you understand the sort of specific requirements of different countries, and also how to reach different constituencies of folks in different countries. So UK and Ireland hospitality sector, often you'd reach those through the likes of LinkedIn, through the likes of professional bodies. Whereas in other countries, and sort of, I'm thinking, you know, Portugal and Italy, it was often professional associations and, you know, having key individuals on board who would be gatekeepers to hospitality organizations or the hospitality, I suppose, community in particular regions. So if you manage to get certain individuals on board, you would, through a snowball effect, be able to bring other people on board. So I suppose really, if you want to maximize the value of the products that you end up with, making sure that you know how to reach different groups in different countries, and understanding how networking works in reality in different countries, I thought was really important. I suppose putting together the collaboration, you know, often was through personal contacts, but also through international conferences, and that was particularly important. Some of my work in Morocco has come through contacts made in international conferences and working with people over there. Some of it has come through people recognizing my work and getting directly in contact with me. But I think critically in all of it is the importance of communication, and the dangers through working solely online, that messages get misinterpreted and miscommunicated. So the importance of checking the understanding of different messages, and where possible, organizing, you know, drop-in meetings like this to make sure that that messages are clear and priorities are clear for a project going forward.
Thanks, David. You very successfully introduced the next topic of, that I wanted to kind of a question I wanted to share with people. But before I go on to that, I just want to I know we have quite a few people on the call. If you would like to ask a question, if you could put it in the chat function, that would be fantastic. Or if you specifically want to say something that you feel you won't be reflected in the chat, please put up your hand and I'll be monitoring it, and I will give you priority over myself to speak. So I will make sure that that you have a voice if you want a voice. You're perfectly welcome to sit there passively and listen and not ask. I've got plenty of questions I want to ask my panel. But please do put questions in the chat if you have a question, or if you want to make a comment, and if you want to speak, put your hand up. So I think David was talking about something which is really interesting, that you've selected your consortium, you've got the people together, they've signed up to the project. But how do you actually manage the project once it's underway? What do you I guess what do you do in order to ensure the project delivers what it needs to deliver, and how do you maintain that relationship? I'm going to invite the panel to comment on this, and please do, if you have any interesting anecdotes. I'm interested to hear about anecdotes. I love anecdotes. Like David losing his clothes to the. I've had exactly the same problem, yes, I think it was in the US, which is, and had to go clothes shopping. I think quite a few of us have had to go clothes shopping, taking advantage of the insurance if we're lucky. But anyway, Imad and, well, I think together, Imad and Numai, because you're kind of working on project. But let's start with Imad. Imad, you've got a couple of projects, because I know you've done projects in Egypt. You're a bit of a seasoned international project delivery. What do you see as the pitfalls, the dangers, the kind of mitigation that you can make about creating a working partnership and delivering what you promise?
Yes, as I said, I worked with a project in Egypt. It was a capacity building project in East, and I'm working at the moment with the Indian 2 projects. So I think one of the dangers is that setting the expectation from partners without knowing the limits, the culture, what they can, what they can't. Sometimes in Europe, you expect some other people to work the same way. You would like things to run, but it's not. The partners are working in their own base and their own bureaucracy sometimes, and they have their own vision. So we have to sit up around the table and set the scene for a good collaboration. Otherwise, it's going to be dangerous that everyone is kind of fragmented and working in a very separate island. So this was something I learned from the project, working with different people from different countries with different cultures as well. Time frame, the time lag between different countries, again, is another barrier. For example, in Sri Lanka, we have 5.5 hours, the same as India at the moment. It's not bad with Egypt, sometimes 1 hour, sometimes 2 hours. But working with Sri Lanka and India for this time frame, they like to work at the end of the day, like almost after 5, they finish, then they can provide time for projects, which is good for us because it's a middle of the day or just early afternoon. But so sometimes it is quite, we forget about this, the 5.5 hours, and it's okay, can we meet at 4 o'clock? And 4 o'clock is 9:30 over there, nearly midnight. So it's okay, we're just going to bed now. So sometimes you forget about the time differences, But as I said, the most important thing is the expectation from each partners based on their own culture and the constraints sometimes they have. It's not easy for them sometimes to take a decision without going higher up in the university, for example. Before you decide to do this or not to do that, then they need some kind of permission. Dealing financially is also is different. For example, in the UK, you are the PI of the project, you have the budget holder, you have, you know from the beginning your limits, say for example, 5,000, but if you need more, you can go to your line manager and so on. And over there is sometimes completely different story. So getting approval of the budget and movement of the budget is not an easy thing to do. So probably all of these kind of risks that anyone working on such a project need to make sure that don't take it kind of, they are not willing to do the job, but they have some limitation, what I would say. Thank you.
Oops, sorry. Thank you, Imad. That's a really interesting insight. I'm just wondering. I'll come back to you, Umay, because I think I'd like to hear a couple more. Let's say from Carolyn, from your perspective, the same question. You know, in terms of partners, how do you maintain a partnership, and where do you see the pitfalls and ways to mitigate against them?
I mean, I think Imad's exactly correct. It's cultural understanding, and it's about going into a partnership, acknowledging that everyone comes from a different culture and that what's, you know, legitimate and the right thing to do may be different, and just communication to make sure that, you know, your regular communication to make sure that everybody has a shared understanding of what we're trying to achieve and when we're trying to achieve it by, and so on, and not taking things personally. This is not my anecdote, but I know you like an anecdote, but I'll give one, which is not mine. It's borrowed from somebody else. But we had a project in Southeast Asia working with partners in Myanmar. And when this person would ask, you know, someone in Myanmar to do something, they'd say, okay, absolutely. But they knew that they couldn't do it, that it wasn't a possibility for them to do it. It wasn't, but they didn't want to say no to it. So they say yes. And then, you know, our colleague thought, okay, that's good, that's in hand. But then it would come out, you know, in the wash a couple of weeks later that actually it's not, we can't actually do that. It's not possible. So there was just a delay, but it wasn't that they didn't want to do it. It's that it wasn't something that they could do, but they didn't want to say no because they felt that it was rude. So it's just understanding these sort of cultural differences. I think the other thing is, this is not necessarily, this is when I was doing my own PhD and I was based in a different country, and it's just acknowledging that there are other ways of doing things, and just because you have learnt that these are ways that, you know, steps that you should take, processes that you should follow, doesn't necessarily mean that they're correct, that you should be doing them. And just going with the flow as well, and adopting different processes so that other people feel more comfortable with the process is something that we should, as sort of international people working internationally, you should be prepared to do and be flexible and take into account that there are different ways of doing things, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong because you don't do them.
I'll get used to it in a minute. Yes, absolutely. And I think that the this idea of learning about different cultures, but also respecting the different cultures at the same time. We obviously we have our kind of post-colonial kind of legacy, and I think we have to be very sensitive about this kind of our way is not necessarily the right way, and I think that's a really interesting insight. Richard, what about you with your various projects? Have you come across certain challenges?
I mean, I agree with everything that Imad and Carolyn have just said. I've just been scribbling a couple of things down. I think perhaps the first one And if I think back to Silken, it is, you know, sometimes when you come into these partnerships, do you promise too much? And I know, Mark, when we found out that we'd secured the Silken funding, you and I both looked at the sort of aims and to-do list for the 3 months, and you know, I certainly nearly had a nervous breakdown, to be honest, thinking how on earth are we going to get this all done? Of course we did in the end, and I know quite a few partners in the consortia were also basically thinking the same thing. So I think first of all, it's making sure that you don't promise too much, that you can achieve what you've set out to do, or that if you set ambitious goals, there's a kind of reflection amongst the partnership that some of them might be sort of, well, we call that, I think we always talk about stretch targets, but maybe it's a sort of not stretch, it's a sort of come back in target if that's such a thing. I also think that, and you know, I don't think this is just necessarily an international culture thing, but when you come into partnerships, it's actually about how well aligned are your aims, and how well are you focused on getting the same things out of the partnership. Everybody thinks that partnership and collaboration is a wonderful thing, and generally my experience of it has been that it is. But sometimes we all go, oh yeah, let's partner up, let's do this, let's do that, and then actually you realise, okay, we actually, you know, we don't necessarily want to do the same things here, and that can cause problems. So I think, again, coming back to that idea from earlier about communication, it's really about understanding that what you're looking to achieve from the partnership is the same as the partners have. And you know, I've been involved in a project where that wasn't the case, and where there was somewhat of a breakdown of trust in the relationship, and that can cause immense problems then in being able to deliver on the sort of project goals or the partnership goals that you've set out. So I think making sure you have that alignment with your partners, and that you're on the same, you know, you can have different targets within the partnership that are relevant to your kind of cultural context, but you know, you've got to be working together towards the shared goals that you have. I think that's the key.
Thanks very much. I'm actually, I've left Umay, I've left you till now because this is, you know, you've had a series of UK partners talking about like their experiences and the pitfalls. Umay, for you, is there anything particular you would say in terms of working with UK partners, especially, let's say that you consider challenging, or what is your take on it?
Mark, that if we consider that yes, when we are doing particular project, yes, mostly yes, time limit is one factor. Other than that, I feel like there is a minimum gaps when we going to focus on the projects. I mean, or when we implement in the real projects. But for me, most challenging part is initiation of the project. Now, one is, if we consider it's different, if we consider the UK context. Now, if the Glasgow Caledonian want to partnership with any other university, GCU has that authority, legitimate authority, then they can sign the contract. But if we consider like countries like Sri Lanka, if you wanted to have a partnership with any foreign university or anything, it is going through, the university doesn't have that you know, power, authority. They have to get the several approval process from the several ministries, starting from the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Treasury and National Planning, sometimes for the more of the capacity building projects. Especially for these Erasmus, we have to go through different, ministries and, get the approval. That process will take, huge amount of effort and the time. And so that is one of a barrier for this setting of the, in the European system, you can't, this is from the organization. But if someone has to sign the partnership to take in a long time, more than 1 month, you will feel there's something, wrong with the process. Actually, it is because of the national legislation. The time, country to country, it is differ, and also the environmental. Now, in the current UK system and the European system, most of the universities operated in, it's more business environment. But in countries like Sri Lanka, it is different, more state sector universities. So that initiation phase is very difficult actually. And also challenging actually, because we are working on two different environments. So certain things you can go to we can go to the line manager and get that pull, but not there. You have to go for the different ministries. That is one of a key issue. But when we started, certain projects, especially the university sector, most of the academics who has international experience, they have completed their PhDs on different countries. So that international exposure is there. For now, there's one most important thing is, that is very good thing. What I know is, now, for example, here, if we consider here United Kingdom, that our postgraduate experience is mainly based on European countries. But if it is like countries like Sri Lanka, it is different. Japan, China, Thailand, Sri Lanka, UK, Europe, all. That combination is there. So that is best for that give some sort of mixture of skills and mixture of thinking patterns. So that is good for the implementation. They can adapt. They know the different cultures, different ways of working. So the main barrier what I can see is for the starting point implementation because of the different hierarchy level and the national legislation.
Thank you very much. I think it's really interesting hearing the challenges that people have from different perspectives. I think going to David's point in the beginning, I think the only solution to this is communication, and getting to know the culture you're working with, and this whole idea of face-to-face. I think it's also true, despite everything, that we also have a major challenge in terms of the fact that you have cultural differences, but then invariably you often have one member of a consortium that really just doesn't work, that really just will not comply, will not deliver. And it's extremely difficult because you're caught between wanting to put real pressure on the partner, but you're worried about losing that partner because that could cause you a whole series of extremely complicated. I remember just one anecdote. This is just to kind of illustrate how you have to be very careful as well about not getting too frustrated. I remember very, very early on, this was in the days where we didn't have internet emails so much as I had to have faxes of people kind of signing on the dotted line. And it was a project with Latin America, with Colombia, as well as a few other Latin American countries. And I think about 1 hour before the deadline, I managed to persuade the Colombian partner that I was waiting for, finally sent me the fax with the signature on it, just like 1 hour before the deadline, which was terrifying. And then the project started, and there was, and this one partner didn't respond to any I don't know, email messages, never responded out of all the partners, and I was becoming furious. And so one day I just phoned the university up and I started berating them and telling them, like, nobody's responding to me. I've written to this guy so many times. And they said, yes, he actually died 3 months ago. And so you always have to be very careful that you're kind of communicating, you know what's happening on the ground, and always be diplomatic. I'm just going to looking at some comments in the chat. First, Emad is asking about the British Council budget cuts, and I'm going to leave that for a second. We'll come on later to kind of future of funding, because I think that will be something. And Sampath has put a chat. Hi, Sampath. From the beginning to the end of this project, we were working together online. Any challenge you encountered in working with us? Just curious to know. And this is a really, really crucial question. This is fantastic because it leads me to the next phase. I mean, David was talking about communication. This whole question, and Rich has also referred to this thing where we had to do another project totally online, just like the Sri Lankan project. I'm going to say something just to answer Sampath's question, and then I'll open it up to my panel members to answer as well. Specifically for this project, Sampath, I think it's been a really enriching learning curve, and I think I'll confess at the very beginning I felt it was the first project that we really carried out under COVID restrictions. I had fantastic dreams of going to Sri Lanka, and so it's been very sad I haven't been able to visit you all. But I think that we've really learned so much doing this project, trying to work out how we can pivot what we were expecting to deliver online with a program of events to then having to pivot to online. I think probably the most challenging for me was we had been set to deliver a kind of a workshop to students, and I think we kind of ambitiously thought we could give this workshop. I think it was to about 200 students or something like that, and we had the workshop planned out. But what we didn't realize, partly culturally, partly linguistically, how difficult it was to create a workshop environment. And I think you were there, Sampath, and you probably remember that was when I felt most under stress, trying to kind of ensure that we had a workshop with active students, about 200 of them at the same time. That was pretty challenging. David, what about you? Has the remote world, you talked about meeting people face to face, so has that been a challenge for you?
Yeah, I think so. I'd like to go back to your previous question, Mark, if I can, and pick up a couple of other things I thought were interesting. You know, yes, I think Imad said that time differences were a factor in international working and international partnership, and I totally agree with him, you know, and particularly at certain times of the year when UK time changes, I have been caught, you know, when the hour goes forward or the hour goes back, I have been caught I don't know how many times, and you go on websites to check the time in particular countries, and you find that the websites themselves haven't been updated, and you know, that's a challenge at particular times of the year. What I would say is one of the things I found in international working and international partnerships is the importance of clear deadlines, but also clear deadlines that have some leeway in them. Now, I know that sounds like a contradiction, but you know, you set a deadline for a piece of work to be done by, say, the end of January, and you send reminders saying we're coming up to the end of January, but culturally with certain countries, you know that even though you set it at the end of January, you're not going to get it to the middle of February. And so as if you're leading the project, you know, you need to understand that really the deadline is the middle of February, but you're communicating the end of January. And it's that little bit of leeway has to be built in, and you know, and that's where your stress levels start going through the roof. You know, certain cultures, and I'm thinking sort of Germanic cultures, if you say the end of January, it's certainly going to be there the end of January, and everything else. But other in Europe, some of the Latin countries, I'm thinking, you know, Spain, Portugal, Italy, end of January is the middle of February, and that's just the nature of doing business. I've also found it's really important to have key leaders or identified leaders for particular work streams. So while you have an overall leader for the project that you're working on, being able to nominate individuals to take responsibility for work packages and making them responsible for work packages is critically important. You know, before I started doing project work, I had a full head of hair and a big mohawk, and I've learned then through doing projects that the importance of delegation and the importance of having other people on board who will take responsibility for certain aspects of the project, and having interim deadlines. There's always this danger with projects that you leave all the deadlines to the very end. And what happens is you have this snowball effect at the end where everything is coming in at once. And if possible, yes, I mean, having work streams should mean that you are parceling out deadlines throughout the project. But that's not always the case. Depending on the project, that's not always the case. So, even if it's just, having drafts of work done by particular points in time, that's critically important, more for momentum than anything else. And I think projects have a momentum, and it's important that you build momentum into projects. And that's been sort of my experience of it, that yes, there are cultural differences, yes, there are time zone differences, but some of the fundamentals of project management are really, really important. And I've been in situations where, like you just described there, Mark, you're coming up to a deadline and you're missing one or a couple of pieces of the puzzle, and you're waiting and you're praying, and somebody gets sick, or I haven't had somebody die, but somebody gets sick, or somebody leaves a university, and the project gets handed over to somebody who has no clue and hasn't been involved in the project at all up till that point. And it's really difficult. It's really difficult where you're having to pick up the pieces. But yeah, that's where communication and diplomacy become really, really important. and not to lose your hair. Clearly me and Mark have had some experience in that regard. And the scars of war, is that it?
Far too many projects. And I think you're absolutely right. I think possibly a bit of dishonesty where you set a deadline, but for you the deadline is a month or two afterwards. And one thing I do in all projects is I have around 6 to 9 months at the end of the project where there's virtually nothing going on, because that's my kind of, as I push things forward, as they get delays, I think it's really important. Let me turn to Richard. What about you, Richard, in terms of managing a project in a post-COVID world and remotely? You talked about the Silken project. Have you had any other projects? I know you did one in Mexico, and the pitfalls of trying to work remotely.
First of all, Mark, next time you set me a deadline for March or something, I know I've actually got till June, so I'm going to remember that one. In some ways, actually, I mean, let's try and put a positive spin on something. In some ways, actually, the post-COVID world, I think, has actually made things a little easier, I think, because actually we look at time differences between countries. What I quite like with the Mexico project, for instance, is that I'd go to bed. When I got up in the morning, things had come through, or work that was there to be done. So actually, I almost think that when you have these international projects, it's almost like you've got a 24-hour clock, because the other country partners are basically working when you're not. Well, that's not always the case, of course. We do work with some partners who they're emailing me even at 5-6 p.m. UK time when they really should be in bed. But I think so. I think there are some positives in terms of the time difference side of things. I think when we look at the online working, it does make some challenges, because I think that sometimes when you have face-to-face meetings, or when you have visits out to the countries, or the countries coming to visit the UK, that actually acts as a nice little pressure point for people, because it really enables them to, everyone knows, okay, we're going to be face-to-face. I've got to have certain elements of the project I'm going to be presenting on, or I've got to be up to date with it. So it does act as a sort of a little bit of a nudge point, I guess, to get people to to do their work, and that's sometimes more difficult. It's easier for people to avoid those awkward situations or those conversations, or when it's all remote and it's email or it's online meetings. So I do think there are some challenges there, but at the same time, it does actually facilitate a lot more project management work, because you're able to have a meeting every week if you need to, in a way where you cannot do when you do these projects online and in person. And I think that we all miss the in-person stuff. I'm the same as you and David. I'm sure everybody else, that I just want to get back out to places like Vietnam and go meet and work with partners again and get back to normal. But I guess moving forwards, what I think will actually happen is that we'll have hybrid models where we do a lot more of the, we do still have the in-country visits, but there'll be a lot more of these kind of online meetings and workshops and various things that really kind of enable that, I guess, and perhaps make it a little bit easier to project manage these things. I mean, the culture certainly does make a difference in terms of how people sort of approach the projects, how they respect deadlines, and you definitely have to have some kind of understanding and empathy there to realize that there's lots of different ways of working. But I think that, I guess to summarize, the online world has kind of brought challenges and it's brought opportunities for us. And I think it does make some elements of the project management more difficult, but other elements it makes easier. And so I guess you have to take the rough with the smooth and hope that in the post-COVID world, we can kind of try and keep the best of both worlds, I would say.
No, I think it's interesting because, I mean, we joked about it earlier, but I think there is something, especially when you're starting a project and starting relationships, to actually get to know those people and the periphery. But I think, as you said, the flip side of it is that actually you meet people more easily online. And I think we're getting used to, and now all my projects, I meet the partners regularly. I mean, all projects like once a month. So we're kind of keeping that relationship, which kind of makes up slightly for the, you see their face all the time. I've certainly seen your face all the time, Rich, even, and get to know our houses and things like that we didn't before. Carolyn, what about you? And I think there's another question from Sampath, which I'll kind of specifically ask the panel as well, but maybe you'd like to reflect on this, Carolyn, as well, about maintaining relationships. But what about our work with Sri Lanka? How have you found this experience of pivoting to kind of this online?
I think that this project is an example of working with partners that, that we can trust to like work collaboratively and things. I think this project could have been very difficult if not all partners were invested in trying to achieve the aims of the project. And I think we've been we're very, very grateful for the engagement across all partners and the ongoing communication with the British Council as well, supporting the project aims. For me, it hasn't really been a challenge at all, apart from the lack of Sri Lankan travel and so on. But one day, I'll get there one day. I think, yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed the project. I hope that Uva Walesa and Peradenia have as well, and got some value from it. And as I say, hopefully we'll get out there at some point, even if it is a different project, to meet everybody in person and see what's been going on in real life. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything else to add to what's already been said. There are bad things and there are good things about it, and hopefully moving forward, there is a bit of travel. There's a bit of hybrid working. I was in a call some months ago where there was a lot of people talking about how great it was, and that a lot of, in fact, it might have actually been the Silicon Conference, where how great it was that we can continue these conversations online. And then we had an NGO in the room who said but these people who are marginalized before are even more marginalized because they don't have the technology to engage in these conversations. So we have to be mindful of the fact that while some people can continue the conversations and continue build the work and everything, it does exclude people out of the conversation because they don't have the platform to engage. So just being mindful of that going forward as well, that it's not a replacement, but that it can be used as a useful tool in some situations. You're on mute again, Mark.
Yeah, I know. I just, my brain doesn't work fast enough. Yes, so no, I absolutely agree, and I think that there's a whole question which I'd like to move on to now. And Emad, if you give us your, because you've had insight into this, and reflecting Sampath's question, this whole idea of the sustainability of a project and the partnerships. How do you sustain them? What are the real challenges about sustaining projects into the long term past the funding? It's all very well when you can say, if you want to receive your money, you have to do the project, but after that, how do you sustain it?
Well, I think this is a challenge, and I will borrow from Richard what he said about good selection of the partners. It's very, very important that the partner are willing to continue after the project, not just during the project and at the end, wrap everything, put it in a nice bag and put it on a shelf. And no one gonna kind of get the usefulness of the project. So, and our project with Sri Lanka at the moment, what we have decided that we need to make sure that everything will be developed for the sake of the centers that will be live forever. Meaning that all the development, all the materials, all the video recording can be run with the minimum effort needed from the centers in the future. If I'm asking them after the project to just take a couple of pages and go and teach this, for example, that simply means they will recreate the materials again and again. So we decided that we make all the materials are kind of is usable, and you can run it by clicking on a button, for example, and they can use it rather than go and redevelop it. So this is the way we see for this project how it could be sustainable. This would takes me to your original story about the man who passed away. So it is very, very important. We had one of the projects who you start with. For example, one of the partners was the Minister of Education and was at the very high level with the minister and his consultants. And the minister left, the consultant left, and David was kind of lucky that the project was handed over to someone else, but this project was not handed into another person. So you completely lost the partner, and this was the implementation part of the project. So you had to go and recreate another way of implementing the project. And you are on the risk that going to be accepted by the funder or not. So it's very, very important that you think for the sustainability before you start writing your proposal, actually, how this is going to continue. So this is how we do it with Sri Lanka. And the same that we are doing for the other two projects in India. We are making sure that this is everything we develop gonna live forever, or can live for a longer period of time, and with the minimum to run it, rather than recreate it again. So this is my point. Thank you.
Thanks, Emad. I think this is so important. This idea, think about your sustainability from the beginning. Think about your dissemination from the beginning. Don't wait until the end. It will be too late. Uday, you're based in Sri Lanka. I know that you're not at the end of the project yet. You're at the beginning. You're probably thinking about sustainability. How do you see it in terms of on the ground to ensure that the project doesn't die as soon as the European funding runs out? Sorry, you're on mute, Uday.
Yeah. We have a plan for sustainability, as Imad indicated from the beginning. Like at the first, year, it will be, open-ended. So it will run as a pilot project. After that, there's a plan to create the demand for certificates to get the train. And for example, I have discussed with this certificate is for skill development of the this working in the renewable energy sector. So I have discussed with these associations, trade associations. For example, if someone is want to install solar PV systems, they have technicians, they have helpers. For those people to get recognized within the industry, take this certificate. So if someone is, so we have, so that will give, I have explained to them that that will give them another opportunity. That means if, for example, helper to work with the industry, so they have to do the health and safety certificate from this one. So that sort of industrial collaboration. And then, when the people go into the industry, they will use the certificate, they will get the certificate. So there's a demand. So that demand will be created. At the same time, there will be a certain cost to, run the program. So we will decide at the time how much will be cost. So that will be quantified. So after you create the demand and after you have done then we have to make the setup. So we in the program we have a plan to set up the who is going to offer the program, monitoring the program, who admissions to the certificate, those things. When we set up those things, we will it will continue with the sustainable way, because industry always has the demand. When we created the demand, it will run.
And that's very interesting, because in a sense, that you're kind of confident about the sustainability of your project, because the demand is there, so that you have a purpose. And I guess that all projects should be the same, that they can see themselves and their value in the long term and can convince industry, the government, etc., of the importance of what they're doing. Thank you, Uday. I'm going to go back to David. David, sustainability of projects, a big challenge?
Huge challenge, absolutely huge challenge. And it's one of those things, and I'm, I suppose, conscious of what Imad said, and I think he's really put his finger on something about making websites and making training products available. But I know even the projects I've been involved in, when you print a book and you find a few years later there's only a few copies left of it, and people are struggling to get hold of it, and it's how do we make this lasting impact? How do we make these projects sustainable? And I know even conferences I've been involved in, 5 years later, the proceedings of those conferences aren't accessible and aren't available. So I think it's something, I don't have any quick solutions. I think it's something that has to be given a lot of thought. I know of efforts that have been made to establish networks, so that when a project finishes, people who've been involved in the project get to meet up virtually every 4 months or so 3 times a year, because if you go further out than 4 months, it loses that sort of momentum, and that loses that sort of impact. So 3 times a year is almost like a minimum to keep momentum from a project alive after the project is finished. So I think it's critical. I've seen some efforts that have been more successful than others, but I haven't seen a silver bullet or a golden bullet that will make a project sustainable in the longer term. I know that's probably not the answer you want me to give, Mark, but it's one of the biggest challenges with projects. It's how to make that long-term sustainable impact.
the good thing is we have Rich, who I'm sure does have a silver bullet to give us. Rich, tell us what the solution is.
Can I be cynical? Win more funding would be tends to be what works quite well. And of course, that depends on the funding stream you're in. And if it's a big European project, then the chances that you're going to be able to bring that consortium together again to sort of win something else is not always going to be so easy. It's perhaps a bit easier when you're working around sort of British Council funding and these other kind of funding streams. But I mean, aside from being a little bit cynical, I guess the other area perhaps that we've had some success in keeping partnerships alive is by sort of embedding wider partnership work, if you want to call it that sort of thing, between partners that isn't actually necessarily to do with the project. I think about work we've done in Vietnam, for instance, where we had projects with them, research projects, discrete projects that were funded. But actually what we started doing is creating shared PhD studentships, engaging with each other's curriculum design, becoming guest or associate lecturers on programs, having some kind, having sort of shared training sessions for senior management and those kind of things. And actually it's all stuff that you can do without too much funding or any funding at all. It keeps the relationship going. It keeps you in their mind, it keeps them in your mind. And then so when the next funding opportunity does come together, you actually have a really nice story that you can tell to the funder about, look, we haven't just kind of clubbed together because we want to win this project. We've worked together before. And actually in the last 2 years since that project ended, we've been working together on teaching or this or that. Even just where, I think we've had Vietnamese partners review some of our research work, and I've reviewed some of their research work just as a sort of peer review. So just little things that don't necessarily have to cost any money or be budgeted, but actually allow you to keep the relationship going and actually have some value to each other in the way that you do that. So that's kind of how we've done it. But there's definitely no doubt that if you can win another project, it makes it all a lot easier to keep everybody together and on track.
See, I knew I could rely on you for that silver bullet. But I think, in all seriousness, I think that I think one of the challenges is we have a day job and projects. We need to invest, and so we need that funding in order to justify what we're doing. Which brings me kind of almost to a kind of. I don't want to make it a kind of depressing conclusion, but I just want to kind of turn the question to the future of funding. Now, let's face it, for the UK with Brexit, European funding is looking challenging, to say the least. British Council funding is being reduced dramatically. There's the Global Challenges Research Fund in the UK, which was cancelled and hopefully coming back again. But just to ask panel members, how do they see the future? I mean, in general terms, in kind of how do you see the funding landscape? But also, if what are your personal vision for what you would like to do next? I'm going to start with Carolyn.
What a question, Mark. I mean, when GCRF was postponed, I think the term was, put on hold until things get back to normal after COVID. I mean, it was a terrible decision, and I think the only thing we can do when that's put alongside Brexit and us, losing all that, access to that fund, which does great work. I don't know what the answer is to that. I remain hopeful that, we'll still be able to use that money to build partnerships and do work that's of use and is impactful across the world. My answer to your question is I don't know, but I hope that the government see sense and see that investing in GCRF is something that we should be doing, and that it's not just about OD work. It's about developing the capacity of researchers within the UK and building these partnerships and generating really interesting research results and building capacity across the world and also within the UK to further our understanding across on some really interesting and important issues. So I don't know what the future of the funding landscape is, and it would be great if somebody here did so that I could know. Emad, see your question in the chat about the next direction in British Council. So I get like little tiny wee nuggets out of, you know, bits of information that come out of the IEU and how they're sort of spending money. And I don't think the dust is settled as yet. And the last thing, the bit that worries me about these sort of cuts is whether or not it will affect in-country jobs and the extent to which, you know, UK-based jobs will remain and in-country jobs will be cut. And that is my concern, that that's the way that things are going. But hopefully that doesn't happen, and that, you know, money will be reintroduced to support that sort of activity.
I'm sure it will. I hope so. Emad, what is your feeling about the future? Notwithstanding you asked Carolyn the question, you kind of elicited this whole topic, but for you personally, how do you feel about future projects?
Quite honest, I've been nervous and trying to find where is the gap, where we can work, where we can make collaboration with other colleagues globally. For example, 1.5 months ago, the British Council announced a Go Global, which is quite popular now. One of the Go Global is called Collaboration, and they ask it for a capacity building to develop a program or a degree. And you can imagine for how much this one to be established, the maximum was 100,000, and they're very generous. And if you compare this to the Erasmus Plus capacity building, it is normally in the range of 800,000 to 950,000 normally. So you can imagine how much is the cut. So I think universities need to be prepared to work for nothing, and the staff time not to be rewarded. You just want to keep the collaboration, but not for gaining any money for that. This is one of the challenges. I think every university needs to think the same, and projects are not to pay the staff time. Projects are to keep the staff engaged and the university engaged with others as well, rather than paying the staff time. I think that this will be the challenge internally that we have to face, because once we started to make the costing, the costing is part of your department, Mark, and they okay, where is the money? This is a deficit, and how much is the deficit? Probably like 3 times the money you can gain. So we need to be prepared for that. But we have to continue working and try to find where is the niche money coming from and the collaboration with different partners, because we have to keep the UK engaged with others. Otherwise, we're gonna die away and will not be able to sustain the UK leading in the world. This is what I see it.
Absolutely, and note taken. I think this is an internal debate for us to persuade our universities to allow us to work for nothing. David, from your perspective.
Same as what Emad said and Carolyn said, it's bleak at the moment. I reach out to European partners because I've been involved in a number of European projects, and they're like, Dave, you're in the UK, Brexit. Yeah, so I'm in the fortunate position. I'm finishing up a GCRF project. Yes, Carolyn, I will send you the stuff by Monday. So yeah, I mean, that's been a real delight, and it's been really helpful. The funding has been really helpful because it's allowed me to work with colleagues in the United States, and we're looking at mentoring that refugees in Myanmar, in Mexico, and in Syria have received, and that's been just a really fascinating project. You know, because of the individuals and you know, on a human level, the hardships that a lot of these refugees have experienced, and how mentoring is helping to broaden their horizons and give them, sort of allow them to see new opportunities, even if those opportunities aren't immediately available to them. So yeah, I think there's a significant danger that the UK becomes a lot more insular, because of a lack of funding, not because of the ambitions of researchers, but simply because the mechanisms aren't there to allow international collaboration. And as Imad said, unless management in the universities are particularly enlightened and see the value in international collaborations and allowing researchers to effectively work for free, then I think there's a real danger that insularity starts to set in.
I'm going to try and not finish on a negative note, David, but I share your concerns, most definitely. I don't know if Rich has anything more positive outlook or a kind of something to make us feel a little less down, Rich?
I'm afraid I'm probably as equally Dr. Doom as everybody else about the research funding landscape. I think what happened with GCRF was a travesty. I mean, the GCRF QR funding, I think for us particularly, was some of the most flexible funding we had in terms of the work we wanted to do with international development and ODA relevant stuff. Let's hope that comes back. My worry when they say things are suspended is that it's a soft way of saying this is cancelled, but you know, we'll see. I think the EU funding is an interesting one. Obviously, the UK government's meant to be developing and bringing in replacement funding for things like ERDF and all the other stuff that we also used to source research money out of. We'll wait and see what that's structured like. My fear there is that for universities like GCU and Northampton, the new replacement funds might be steered more towards the sort of big red bricks and that kind of thing. I think that the British Council funding is going to be an interesting one. I think we've seen with the Going Global partnership that actually probably the future is going to be a lot more smaller amounts of funding, more projects, but smaller amounts of funding. With as we've seen, Mark, with universities expected to do a lot more with a lot less. I guess on the positive side of things, the one area we could look at is how do we broaden our sort of idea of where we get research funding from. I'm doing some work with Trinity College Dublin at the moment, and they've had a really interesting model where they've actually been basically engaging with corporates, and you know they needed about £30,000 I think for some research funding, and they got it from Facebook, and they got it from Facebook easy. You know, there was no kind of let's write a 100-page bid and then wait 12 months to see if we've won it. The corporate said this is a really good idea, we'd like to badge the research. Now of course there's some issues there, isn't there, when you sort of taking corporate money and you have to understand the reasons why they're doing it. But I think that's sort of, you know, tapping into those corporate CSR budgets is one area. The other area that we're exploring at the university is how do we expand our consultancy work and then ring fence any surplus we can make from consultancy work to fund research. So if we're going to get the CSR fundings, or if we're going to do consultancy work for big corporations or the private sector, making sure that we charge market rates and then use the surplus that we generate from that to set up research funds or to develop PhD studentships and those kind of things. So I think that there are some other avenues that we can explore that can maybe make it a little less bleak than it perhaps looks. But it's certainly at the moment, I think, certainly from a UK perspective, I just have my head in my hands as to what's happened over the last 5 years and quite a number of things. But anyway, we don't want to get into that with 8 minutes to go. So
I'm conscious that all this doom and gloom is from the UK end, and I'm relying on you, Uday, to tell us how positive it is in Sri Lanka in terms of the funding landscape.
Yeah, actually, in the Sri Lankan context, I feel like more opportunities for funding opportunities for it's Erasmus Plus already open all the time. And not only that, Norwegian, there are the different grant scheme, and also South Korea and Japan. So there are number of, even from China, there are a number of opportunities for the collaboration. There are a number of grants, but again, in our case, the funding availability is there, but I feel like limited collaboration with the international partners because of the national legislation and lack of setup. So you know how it should work now for getting certain collaboration to sign anything. It should go to the different ministries, and it will take long time. And that's most of the academic in the current system. They were not motivated to go through that. That is one thing. And the next thing is unawareness of these opportunities. If these are opportunities are there, you can apply. This is the method, and that particular setup is not developed in a way. If we compare to the UK, it is not developed. So that mechanisms need to be developed, and the complexity of the process for applying these, getting grant agreement signing should be reduced. So that is, if we can match those two, if you can, we can do it. I mean, if we are doing the certain things, we are discussing with the National Science Foundation of Sri Lanka to reduce this, complexity of the grant agreement signing process. And if we can educate everyone within the community the opportunities, then there is a huge opportunity to develop with more collaborative opportunities. And country-wise scientific development we can make very quickly.
Yes, and I think it's a really good point that Dr. Sampath makes in terms of there's a lot of funding for tech base, and it's the social impact area and how much we can ensure that funding is also included. I think, Uday, you mentioned the European, the capacity building projects, fantastic opportunity for Sri Lanka. I know I've got a meeting, I think at some point I'm going to meet Mahesh from Uralasa to talk about what we can do. Unfortunately, we can't be partners, which is extremely upsetting because we used to be UK #1 beneficiary of Erasmus Plus project funding. But I do think there's a lot of opportunity there, and we're more than happy to help and support the development of a project. Dr. Sampath, we have just a couple of minutes left, and you've been asking some really interesting questions, and I had a question for you. And I don't know if you're prepared to speak just for a minute or so, because I wanted to revert the question for you and had to reflect a little bit on your experience of this project, working with us and working internationally. How has it been for you guys? I'm just hoping Dr. Sampath is there. Yes.
Wait for a while.
Yeah, I think we have technical issues to hear you. Is that right? I can hear you now, Dr. Sampath.
Yeah, Mark, can you hear me now?
Perfect.
I'm so sorry that I went out because there was a kind of a technical problem inside our conference hall. So anyway, actually that was really interesting for us also to work with you guys. And it was really, important for us actually, to me, as a person, to me, the social entrepreneurship is a new concept. But whereas if you just take Kundu and all other people, they are experienced people. But I learned a lot from this project as a person. And also our university gets benefited from this this project because now we were able to establish our incubator, and we have trained 15 incubators, and also we are about to start another incubation program after this I mean, say 2K22 event. So we got more than 60 proposals to incubate them. We have to select the most important projects from those among those proposals, and then we are going ahead, and we got a problem in a way that so in that case we need to create some harder position for incubator, because still because this is new to us, and even the UBL cells, that is also new to us. So in that case, we don't have a permanent card position yet. So anyway, we are trying our best to keep it sustainable, our incubator, which we established at Gorelas University. And thanks to you, and we have done a great job for us, and you have conducted many awareness sessions and training programs and many things, actually roundtable discussions. So they gave us a lot of information, knowledge, and data. So we are sure that we can go ahead without difficulty. So thank you guys, and thank you very much for everybody, especially from GCU, and you have taken a lot of expertise from other universities and all around the world. So I must be thankful to everybody for giving us this opportunity to work with you guys, and we just worked very pleasantly, and we got a lot of things. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sampath, and it's been the pleasure's been mutual. And of course, it continues and will continue. I think the one thing that we know is that the relationship we've forged, even without having face-to-face engagement, has been really enriching for all of us, and I think will be sustainable. I think that brings us to the end of this debate. So I'd just like to thank the speakers, to Imad, to Uday, and to David, Rich, and Carolyn. Thanks very much for listening, and I hope the rest of the conference goes really well, and wish we were there with you to enjoy the Sri Lankan sunshine. So thank you very much, everybody.
On behalf of the SAE 2K22 organizers, I would like to extend my thanks to all of the panelists. And also I would like to extend my thanks to Mark Anderson, Director of Research and Innovation at GCU, for conducting this session. I think we could all agree that it was very insightful. Thank you so much.